I could never stand her." Those were the bitter words Ernest Borgnine uttered when mentioning Shelley Winters, even at the age of 90. But what could have made a man as kind-hearted and down-to-earth as Borgnine hold such a deep-seated hatred for Shelley Winters for decades? This wasn't just a typical feud between two actors. Their clash was so intense that it sent shockwaves through Hollywood, a story filled with resentment, ego, and scathing insults, one that Borgnine could never forgive, even in his final years. So what really happened? A public humiliation? A behind-the-scenes battle? Or something even worse? Let's uncover the truth. Hollywood in the 1960s was a ruthless world where oversized egos clashed on set, leaving behind irreparable rifts. Among the most infamous rivalries, the conflict between Ernest Borgnine and Shelley Winters remains one of the most intriguing and talked about for decades. When Borgnine accepted a role alongside Shelley Winters, he had no idea he was about to walk into a storm of drama. Fresh off his Oscar win for Marty, Borgnine was a no-nonsense, pragmatic man of few words but great strength. Winters, on the other hand, was an unpredictable whirlwind, bold, ambitious, and unafraid to challenge anyone. From the very first day on set, things went south. As Borgnine entered the makeup room, he found Shelley Winters casually sipping coffee, her legs crossed. She glanced up at him and, without missing a beat, delivered a biting remark. "I've heard you're a great actor, but I've never really believed those stories." Borgnine froze for a moment. He knew Winters had a reputation for being blunt, but this felt more like provocation than casual banter. Instead of reacting, he simply smiled and got to work. But that was only the beginning. Borgnine prided himself on professionalism. He had worked with difficult actors before, but Winters was something else entirely. Every scene with her became a test. She constantly changed her lines, altered her delivery without warning, forcing Borgnine to adapt on the spot. Then came a particularly intense scene, a heated argument between their characters. Borgnine had meticulously prepared, but as the cameras rolled, Winters suddenly threw a full glass of red wine straight into his face. It wasn't in the script. The entire crew fell silent. Borgnine didn't need a mirror to know what his face looked like at that moment. Slowly, he wiped his face and turned to the director. "Are we shooting a different movie that I wasn't informed about?" The crew chuckled, but Borgnine didn't. He knew Winters had done it on purpose, to rattle him. But why? Did she see him as an unworthy rival? Or was this just a power play from an actress who was used to controlling her co-stars? Winters simply shrugged, her expression defiant. "I just felt the scene needed a bit more realism." From that moment on, the film was no longer just a work of art, it became a psychological battle between its two leads. If Winters changed her lines, Borgnine would improvise faster. If she tried to provoke him, he would counter with an unsettling calmness. But the tension extended beyond the set. Winters took jabs at Borgnine in interviews, once telling the press that working with him was like trying to act alongside a brick wall. Borgnine rarely responded. He wasn't one for public feuds. But that didn't mean he wasn't furious. Winters' words weren't just personal insults, they were direct attacks on his professional reputation. One day, near the end of filming, the cast and crew gathered to review some footage. When a pivotal scene between Borgnine and Winters played, she suddenly burst into laughter. "Oh my God, you're as stiff as a plank," she cackled. This time, Borgnine didn't stay silent. He slowly turned to Winters and delivered a line that the crew would never forget. "Shelley, if I'm as stiff as a plank, then you're the storm that wrecks everything in your path." The room fell silent. For the first time, Winters had no comeback. The movie was eventually completed, but their relationship was beyond repair. Winters went on to have a stellar career, winning another Oscar, but whenever she spoke of Borgnine, her words remained laced with sarcasm. As for Borgnine, despite being known as an affable and professional actor, he always deflected when asked about Shelley Winters. His only response was a dry chuckle before changing the subject. However, in his later years, during a rare interview, Borgnine finally spoke about his experience working with Winters. When asked about it, he let out a long sigh. "I don't hate anyone in this industry. But if there was ever someone who nearly made me lose my temper, it was Shelley Winters." The word seemed mild, but for a man like Borgnine, who had seen it all in Hollywood, it was a bitter admission of a feud that could never be mended. If Ernest Borgnine's first collaboration with Shelley Winters had left a bad taste in his mouth, it was only the beginning. Because after that, every encounter between them only fueled the flames of their feud even more. Stories of their clashes soon became Hollywood legend. Once, at a star-studded MGM party, Borgnine entered the room, casually chatting with his colleagues. But the moment Shelley Winters spotted him, she raised her voice for everyone to hear. "Oh, isn't that Ernest? I still haven't forgotten how you nearly drove the entire crew insane with your temper." For a brief moment, the room fell silent before a few nervous laughs broke out. Winters knew how to command attention, and she never missed the opportunity to throw out a sharp remark at the right moment. But Borgnine was not one to tolerate public humiliation, especially in front of powerful industry figures. Turning to face Winters, he gave her a smirking glance and shot back. "At least I'm not the one making the crew reshoot a scene dozens of times just because I couldn't cry on cue." A few onlookers let out amused gasps. But Winters, instead of looking flustered, burst into laughter as if she had just heard the funniest joke of the night. "You think I couldn't cry? Sweetheart, I have 2 Academy Awards. If my tears weren't convincing, someone must have edited them into a masterpiece." The exchange lasted only minutes, but the tension in the room lingered. People soon returned to their drinks, but everyone understood one thing: this wasn't just another petty argument. This was war. A feud that went beyond the set. What had started as on-set conflicts soon spilled over into real life. When a famous director was once interviewed about Winters, he praised her as a brilliant talent, but then leaned in and chuckled. "But let me tell you a little secret. If you ever cast Shelley Winters and Ernest Borgnine in the same movie, be prepared to burn through your entire post-production budget. They can't share a frame without causing chaos." In reality, some directors deliberately avoided pairing them in major projects, fearing their animosity would disrupt production. But fate had other plans. One day, against all odds, they were cast in the same film once again. And this time, things spiraled further out of control. Hollywood has an unspoken rule: no enemy ever truly disappears. They're simply waiting for the day they cross paths again. And that's exactly what happened with Borgnine and Winters. Years after their first film together, a bold director decided to tempt fate by bringing them onto the same project. By then, Borgnine had become a seasoned Hollywood veteran, while Winters, though no longer at the peak of her career, remained a formidable presence. From the first day on set, the air was thick with tension. They stood facing each other, saying nothing. But their eyes said it all: the past arguments, the public insults, the lingering resentment. None of it had faded. And then, just as expected, everything exploded. In a particularly tense scene, Winters had to deliver a line directly to Borgnine. The director called action. And immediately, Winters deviated from the script, spitting out a cutting remark. "Oh God, why am I stuck acting with this guy again?" Borgnine froze for a second. The director hadn't even had time to call cut before he fired back. "Then do us all a favor and walk off the set. Stop wasting my time." The atmosphere turned to ice. The entire crew stood motionless, barely daring to breathe. This was no longer just an on-set dispute. This was a crack running through the heart of the production, threatening to tear it apart. At the end of the day, the director had no choice but to summon both actors for a private meeting, demanding a ceasefire. But did that truly end their feud? Not even close. Because if there was ever a moment that made Ernest Borgnine loathe Shelley Winters to his very core, it hadn't happened yet. It was still to come. The feud that never ended. The rivalry between Ernest Borgnine and Shelley Winters had spanned decades, but if there was ever a moment that sent their relationship plummeting into an irreparable abyss, a moment Borgnine could never forgive, it was what happened in 1972. No matter how much they despised each other, Hollywood had a way of forcing adversaries into the same project. And this time, fate once again brought them together in The Poseidon Adventure, one of the biggest disaster films of the 1970s. Borgnine played Mike Rogo, a hot-tempered former cop, while Winters took on the role of Belle Rosen, a warm-hearted elderly woman. The cruel irony? This time, their characters couldn't avoid each other. They had to share some of the most pivotal scenes in the film. Everyone on set knew the history between them, and the entire crew watched anxiously, wondering if they could coexist without turning the production into a disaster of its own. But from the very beginning, things did not go smoothly. Tensions rise on set. From day one, the atmosphere was suffocating. Borgnine, known for his naturalistic acting style, found Winters overly theatrical, always angling for the camera's attention. Winters, on the other hand, believed Borgnine lacked emotional depth and relied too much on yelling for dramatic effect. Director Ronald Neame repeatedly stepped in, urging them to be more professional, but with two such strong personalities, his words had little impact. Then, the fateful day arrived. In a crucial scene, Winters' character was supposed to have a deeply emotional moment while Borgnine's character reacted with worry and confusion. Everything seemed to be going well until Winters abruptly stopped mid-scene, turned to Borgnine, and loudly declared in front of the entire crew, "Oh my God, Ernest. Can you even act? I've worked with real legends, Marlon Brando, Paul Newman, and you? You sound like you're reading lines off a cue card." No one on set uttered a word. The entire crew stood frozen, waiting to see how Borgnine would respond. Ernest Borgnine was not easily rattled by criticism, but this time was different. Shelley Winters hadn't just insulted his acting, she had publicly compared him to some of Hollywood's greatest legends, making him seem like a second-rate performer in a room full of A-list stars. Borgnine clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and stepped toward Winters. Everyone held their breath. Would he lose control and fire back? Would he walk off set, disrupting the entire shoot? Instead, he simply gave a cold smile and said, "You know what, Shelley? I may not be Paul Newman or Marlon Brando, but at least I don't have to scream to make people remember me." Then, he turned and walked away, leaving Winters standing there, her face flushed with anger. After that incident, nothing between them was ever the same. Though they continued filming the remaining scenes, neither spoke to the other again. When the movie wrapped, Winters carried on with her condescending attitude in interviews, occasionally throwing public jabs at Borgnine. But for Borgnine, it was over. For years after, he actively avoided Winters at industry events, refused to collaborate with her on any future projects, and when asked about her in interviews, he would simply smirk and change the subject. To Ernest Borgnine, Shelley Winters was no longer just an annoying colleague, she had become a name he no longer wished to acknowledge. A feud that time couldn't heal. If anyone believed that time could heal all wounds, the animosity between Ernest Borgnine and Shelley Winters proved otherwise. After their explosive confrontation on the set of The Poseidon Adventure, many in the industry assumed that they would eventually move past their feud. After all, Hollywood was full of big egos and fiery clashes. But no, for Borgnine, that incident wasn't just a misunderstanding at work. It was a public humiliation he would never forgive. Though they never worked together again after The Poseidon Adventure, Borgnine and Winters inevitably crossed paths at Hollywood events. It was unavoidable, both were screen legends. Yet, every time they were in the same room, the cold tension between them was unmistakable. One evening in the 1980s, both were invited to an event honoring cinema legends. When Winters stepped onto the stage to receive her award, Borgnine, seated in the front row, abruptly stood up and walked out of the auditorium. The audience was stunned, and the press wasted no time reporting on his dramatic exit the following day. Shortly after, in a televised interview, Borgnine was asked about co-stars he would never work with again. Without hesitation, he mentioned Shelley Winters. The audience chuckled, thinking he was joking. But Borgnine merely raised an eyebrow, stone-faced, and continued speaking with an honesty so blunt it left the room silent. "I've worked with a lot of difficult people," But Shelley, my God, she was a whole different level. There was no humor in his voice, only raw, unfiltered truth. Winters, never one to back down, fired back. In another talk show appearance, she mocked Borgnine, calling him a rude, stubborn man who always thought he was right. She retold the infamous story from the Poseidon Adventure set, but this time with even more sarcasm. He thought he was the boss on set. But I wasn't someone who could be bullied. By this point, everyone following their long-standing feud understood this wasn't just a minor professional disagreement. It was lifelong resentment. Beyond the public spats, stories of their hostility circulated in Hollywood's backstage circles. One insider recalled an event hosted by the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, where Borgnine and Winters were accidentally seated at the same table. The moment Borgnine realized it, he immediately requested to be moved. A well-known film critic at the time commented, "Ernest Borgnine was never one to be fake. If he liked you, you knew it. If he hated you, you knew it even more." Shelley Winters, with her fiery personality, never attempted to make amends. She could have extended an olive branch, but she never did. And so, for decades, the two went through life never reconciling. In 2006, Shelley Winters passed away at the age of 85. As news of her death spread, colleagues and friends in the industry shared heartfelt tributes. But from Ernest Borgnine, silence. When reporters asked if he had anything to say about her passing, he simply replied, "She lived a lively life, and I'm sure she had no regrets. No condolences. No forgiveness." Even when Borgnine passed away in 2012, 6 years after Winters, their feud remained unresolved. Hollywood had seen its fair share of legendary rivalries, but few lasted beyond the grave like theirs. Some feuds never fade. Time may erase many things, but some stories remain etched in Hollywood's memory like scars that never fade. The long-standing tension between Ernest Borgnine and Shelley Winters is one such story. Though both have passed away, their infamous feud continues to be discussed, a lasting legacy of two silver screen legends. Hollywood has never been short on clashes between stars. From Bette Davis and Joan Crawford to Frank Sinatra and Marlon Brando, and even William Shatner and George Takei, every rivalry has its own unique flavor. But what makes the rift between Ernest Borgnine and Shelley Winters stand out is this: it wasn't just a fleeting on-set conflict. It lasted a lifetime, without reconciliation, without apologies. Even after their deaths, filmmakers and fans still recount their animosity. Film historians frequently include their rivalry in lists of Hollywood's most notorious feuds. A director who had worked with both once remarked, "You could feel the tension between them even when they weren't in the same room." If you praised Shelley Winters in front of Ernest Borgnine, his expression would immediately change. And if you mentioned Ernest to Shelley, she would scoff and shake her head. This alone speaks volumes. Even without sharing the screen, their resentment never faded. Yet, despite their personal animosities, no one could deny their immense talent and contributions to Hollywood. Ernest Borgnine, with a career spanning over 6 decades, left his mark with iconic roles in Marty, The Wild Bunch, The Poseidon Adventure, and countless other films. He defied Hollywood's conventional standards of leading men, not traditionally handsome, yet captivating audiences with his raw, powerful performances. Shelley Winters, with 2 Academy Awards and dozens of unforgettable roles, was the epitome of boldness and talent. She could transform from a glamorous starlet to a gritty, complex character with ease. She never shied away from challenges and was always ready to take on anyone, even the toughest men in Hollywood. Though they despised each other, both left an undeniable imprint on the film industry. If Hollywood were ever to make a film about its most legendary rivalries, the story of Ernest Borgnine and Shelley Winters would be an essential chapter. Imagine a cinematic reenactment of their most intense moments, on-set arguments, heated exchanges on talk shows, and the many events where they deliberately avoided each other. And if a documentary were ever made about their lives, there would undoubtedly be an extended segment dedicated to their unresolved feud. The Borgnine-Winters rivalry wasn't just about two actors who didn't get along. It was a testament to how pride and ego can fuel grudges that last a lifetime, even when everything else fades into history. Had either of them been willing to make peace, perhaps things could have been different. But both Shelley Winters and Ernest Borgnine were forces of nature, neither willing to back down, and that's what kept their animosity alive until the very end. So, what can we take away from their story? Life is short. Conflicts are inevitable, but sometimes forgiveness isn't about the other person, it's about freeing yourself from the weight of the past.